Hello and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That's for you to decide. Back in Wrath of the Lich King, Blizzard added the inscription profession, and as part of that, the glyph system that all players would interact with. Initially, there were 3 tiers of glyph: Prime, Major, and Minor, with 3 slots available for each. Prime glyphs were generally straight power upgrades. Major glyphs still affected combat, but usually involved some sort of trade-off that made them less overtly an upgrade. And minor glyphs were purely for fun, convenience, and cosmetics. As the years rolled by, the glyph system was gradually stripped down to barely exist at all. In Mists of Pandaria, prime glyphs were removed, which lined up with the talent revamp. Bloat and non-choices were trimmed out, and what remained was always a meaningful choice. With Legion, major glyphs were also removed. Again, this kind of made sense at the time. Artifact weapons were being introduced, which added a whole slew of spec-specific upgrades and occupied a similar purpose, albeit without any choice involved. At the same time, the glyph interface was entirely removed, with glyphs being made to interact instead with your spellbook. This had the advantage of no longer limiting you to 3 minor glyphs, but the disadvantage of making it harder or impossible to stack multiple glyphs that affected the same spell. Thereafter, glyphs have been practically forgotten. A few minor glyphs have been added over the years, but very intermittently. It would not be inaccurate to say that the glyph system has become less than a shadow of its former self. Now, I can absolutely understand the removal of prime glyphs, and possibly even major glyphs, as it could be argued that they were hogging design space that could be occupied by other systems. But the way glyphs have been almost completely abandoned seems like a terrible waste, especially when it can functionally fulfill a lot of the player base's desire for customization. It's also a bit bizarre because in recent years, it feels like Blizzard has been more and more willing to give players freedom in that regard. Appearance customizations like the Night Warrior eyes, Dark Ranger customizations for Blood Elves, Void Elves, and Night Elves, and Minari Eridar customizations for Draenei. They've started to divorce races and classes from one another, allowing players to make some truly questionable combos, like Rogues for Tauren and Warlocks for Draenei and Lightforged Draenei. They've also added the ability to transmog into gray and white items, and they introduce increasingly more absurd transmog sets like beachwear, magical girl outfits, and onesies. Additionally, they've increased the number of appearance options for druid forms and warlock pets, now done through the barbershop, which I think is actually a very good change. So in light of all of this, it feels especially strange that what was once the primary form of customization, other than your physical appearance, is now all but absent, and I think that's a shame. One possible explanation for the continued neglect of glyphs is that a lot of what could have gone into them was devoted to hero talents. Hero talents feel very strange to me, and very much like something that was concocted just to make the War Within feel like it had more going on. They give you a minor sense of progression whenever you level up, but are mostly just a binary choice that slightly affects your gameplay. Spellslinger Frostmage, for example, really boils down to having a lot more frozen orbs. Diabolus Destruction Warlocks just passively spawn demons that do damage as they spend their soul shards. Archon Holy Priest just makes your Halo button more fun to press. These aren't inherently bad things, but it feels like a lot of effort and posturing for something that could have been singular talents. There are also choice nodes, but they felt even less consequential. To be honest, the main allure of hero specs was the visual elements and fantasy that came with them. It was easy to get hyped about being able to play as a Mountain Thane, as a Farseer, as a Rider of the Apocalypse. Heck, some hero specs like Dark Ranger have even been floated by players as a potential class. Looking back, when hero specs were announced, I was stoked as heck just because I'd be able to use Frostfire Bolt for the first time since Warlords of Draenor, though I ultimately didn't even go Frostfire because Spellslinger just felt better to play. But at the same time, you've got loads of hero specs that feel really phoned in, existing just to fill the roster. Fell-Scarred Demon Hunters, Trickster Rogue, Fatebound Rogue, Slayer Warrior. Maybe they're fun to play, I don't know, but those are some pretty boring concepts. I'll be blunt and say that I was quite surprised that hero specs are continuing into the next expansion, even having 3 extra talents added to each tree. because honestly, they felt very much like another borrowed power system but dressed up in a way that feels more integral to your character's fantasy. There have been similar systems to these two, such as artifact weapons and soulbinds, but I feel like Glyphs and hero specs have been the most cosmetically oriented. And as far as cosmetics go, Glyphs were simply far more enjoyable. The post-Kata iteration with major and minor Glyphs felt best, and frankly, the most honest with their minimal gameplay impact. Though I doubt it would happen, I would love for a revitalization of the Glyph system once hero talents have been retired, one without a 3-slot limit. Players will probably be upset about some of their new graphics being taken away. Of course, they can simply be folded into the normal talent trees the way that many popular artifact and covenant abilities were. But I think Glyphs would simply offer a more robust solution. It would allow the cosmetics to be kept separate from the mechanics, which helps keep both of them cleaner. It would provide a truly evergreen platform for them to add more customizations to in the future, and it could open up opportunities for more content. On that first point, it would allow Blizzard to really let players live out more niche fantasies that don't necessarily make sense to dedicate core class design elements to. I think the Sentinel hero spec is a blatant example of where hero specs just aren't a proper fit. Sentinels are explicitly a Night Elf faction, and even if you want to afford players the freedom to RP their own justifications for why their Forsaken character now is one, I think it's best if players don't have to make that mental leap if they don't want to, just because they prefer that spec. And that's hardly the only one that runs into that issue. Heck, even within the same Hunter class, we've also got Dark Rangers, which doesn't exactly make a ton of sense for a High Mountain Tauren to be. And to elaborate on the last point about content opportunities, I think that they could implement the Glyphs in a way similar to how runes were implemented in Season of Discovery. Or at least how I think they were implemented, because I haven't actually played it. Basically, little secrets and riddles and puzzles spread throughout the world that would let you learn them, after which you could toggle them on and off. I suppose it's also very similar in concept to how a lot of hidden artifact appearances were implemented back in Legion. Really, I would almost take it even further and have them unlocked through much more involved and difficult means, such as the Green Fire unlock quests that we were able to complete during Mists of Pandaria. My only hesitation on that front is that it might be a bit too much to apply that to every cosmetic option they might add this way. But as someone who really enjoyed that quest chain, I do think it would be immensely satisfying. So yeah, I suppose this wasn't the deepest idea for a video topic, but Glyphs and hero talents are both things I wanted to talk about, so now I can cross them off my list. Glyphs were cool, hero specs drool. Let me just glyph flurry into looking like old school Frost Firebolt. Seriously, the new version just isn't as weighty anyway. Same with Chaos Bolt compared to its old animation. Why do they keep downgrading our spell effects? Before I get into this week's drawing, I just wanted to cover a little anecdote concerning one of the hero specs that I actually do like, that being Mountain Thane for Fury and Protection Warriors. While clearly inspired by the Mountain Kings of Dwarven origins, I feel like the concept is just vague enough that you could apply it to other races. Which I did. I applied it to my High Mountain Tauren Fury Warrior. And I feel like it adds just the right amount of spice to a class that conceptually is a little bit mundane. I'm no longer just a guy swinging heavy weapons around, I'm a guy swinging heavy weapons and lightning around. And I like how minimal the effect on actual gameplay is. It pretty much just adds Thunderclap into your normal rotation, which is about the most impact I would want hero talents to actually have. Anyway, as part of this Mountain Thane fantasy, I really wanted the Season 1 Elite PvP set from The War Within. It just felt like an amazing fit. Unfortunately, to get that complete set, I had to reach 1800 on a warrior during that season. So despite my anxieties, I bit the bullet and went for it. First, I hit 1800 on my Holy Priest just to complete that set. Then I geared up my warrior and honor gear and went to it. And honestly, it was kind of easier than I expected. I mean, I joked about it in the past, but I pretty much did just go Unga Bunga mode and managed to get there. Of course, I did throw out any crowd control abilities that I was able to, but there wasn't a ton of strategy beyond that. And it was actually pretty fun. I felt like an absolute bully, and not just because I was playing a male High Mountain Tauren. Although, yes, also because I was playing a male high mountain Tauren because I was just beefy as heck, and I felt like I was being an absolute pain in the rump to anyone that I was focusing. So yes, fellow casters and healers, you are 100% absolutely justified in your hatred of DPS warriors in Arena. I'm allowed to say that now. Anyway, yeah, I was able to hit 1800, I'm sure in no small part due to the fact that I was doing this late in the season, so there was plenty of rating inflation to benefit from, but it actually worked out absolutely perfectly because I managed to hit 1800 on the exact same game that gave me 100% of the progress towards the Vicious mount. Really, the only unfortunate part about the whole grind was that as a DPS player, I had much longer queue times, which is why I have continued using my Holy Priest ever since then. But if there are any more elite sets that I really want in the future, who knows? Okay, now onto this week's drawing. Because I spent so much of the video talking about Mountain Thanes and Kings, I of course went with the most iconic of the bunch, Muradin Bronzebeard, who, you know, used to feel like a really important character back during Reign of Chaos and then again during Wrath of the Lich King, but has fallen completely out of focus since then. He's had practically zero presence in the game compared to either Magni or Bran, which kind of makes him the Varisa of the Bronzebeards, but like even more forgotten than that. Anyway, he's an okay character. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other about him. And I drew him in Dragonblight just because that's where Frostmourne Cavern is located. I didn't actually draw him in Frostmourne Cavern, but he's not too far away. I think I remember him being pretty fun to play in HOTS, but it's been a long time. And I think that's everything. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye-bye.